This month has seen the release of new GPUs with the 7700 XT and the 7800 XT, and not only are they interesting in their own right, they have also forced Nvidia to offer some lower pricing on cards like the 4060 Ti 16GB and RTX 4070. So we are seeing some shakeup to the GPU market in this price class at least. And I do mention price class. I structure my GPU recommendation videos by price category, not name category, meaning we're not going to put the 7700 XT into some comparison against the 4070 just because they both have a 70 in them. But instead, we're going to look at GPUs that cost the same, like the 4060 Ti 16GB versus the 7700 XT. So in other words, we do this by price class because I think most people have a certain budget they can spend on their GPU, and we'll be looking at what's the best value GPU you can buy at that price point. Also, to help you increase your budget, you should sell your old GPU in order to fund your upgrade, and today's sponsor, Jawa.gg, offers you the simplest and fastest way to sell your GPU. You can sell your functioning GPU to Jawa directly for instant cash following the link in the video description and pinned comment to get an instant offer. Also, if you're buying hardware on Jawa, use the code OWEN10 to get $10 off your first purchase. Now, how does all of this work? It offers you an instant pricing. Basically, you tell them about your GPU model and condition for an instant offer. You ship it. You print your free shipping label and mail them your GPU. And that's a big deal. You don't have to pay the shipping. That's all factored into the pricing already. They inspect it. They'll inspect the part, make sure everything checks out, and then you get paid. Most sellers get paid within 1 business day after the part is received. So again, the idea here is you do not need to wait around for a third-party buyer. You don't need to deal with paying for shipping and all of that yourself. It's super easy and convenient, and now you've got some extra cash to throw at your upgrade. Again, follow the link in the video description. Now, in this video, we're going to be focusing on, again, price categories, and the biggest one we've seen a shakeup to has been this $400 to $600 price point. So I think I'm actually going to start there. I usually start at the bottom now, but now we're here. This is the most interesting part. So let's go ahead and look at how it's shaken up. The 7800 XT came in at a $500 MSRP and looks quite good against the competition at that price. However, it has sold so well that if I was buying today, the cheapest model I can find is $520, and then they kind of go up from there. I do expect stock to replenish and more $500 models to be available, but again, the lowest price I'm seeing as of today is $520. Now that gives it a bit of a problem because the 6800 XT that it's namesake replacing is currently available, at least in the US market, at $490 and $500. So you can get it for $20 to $30 less at the exact current pricing at this moment. And they do perform very similarly. Although the 7800 XT is a little bit faster, a little bit more energy efficient, offers newer features like AV1 encoding and some like HyperRX is exclusive to AMD's 7000 series, which gets you like anti-lag plus, which is a little bit better latency reduction than the older anti-lag. So there's some exclusive reasons why you still might want to pay the extra $20 or $30 difference, but I do want to throw that out there that 6800 XT is still offering great value. Now, the impact that this has had on the market from the Nvidia perspective is that this has forced Nvidia to lower their prices on their RTX 4070. We can now see at least 4 models available at $550, and this just has not been a thing since the 4070 has come out. Occasionally, one retailer will have one discounted a little bit, but suddenly a whole bunch available at $550 tells me that Nvidia has had to respond. And while in my launch review, I said that you have to stretch pretty hard to find reasons to spend $100 more on an RTX 4070. If I was buying one right now, again, the 7800 XT is coming in at $520 at if I was buying today. and the 4070 is coming in at $550 if I was buying today, and that makes it only a $30 price gap. So suddenly this becomes much more competitive. Now granted, I would love to see both of these GPUs at $500 even, and then it becomes more of an argument of a bit more rasterized power versus versus more ray tracing power and features. Right now, though, it's still, you're paying more for those for that Nvidia side of things, and also there is a VRAM difference here. Now, in my testing, 12 gigabytes of VRAM at 1440p and 1080p is fine right now, but VRAM usage in games will always go up over time, and so the 16 gigabytes on the 7800 XT certainly should not be ignored in terms of the longevity of the GPU and its usefulness, although, like I said, I don't hate 12 gigabytes of VRAM as far as right now goes, but that is certainly something to keep in mind. Now, let's talk about some feature set differences, because that's really what this is going to come down to. Nvidia's DLSS upscaling, and I'm not even talking about frame generation at this point, does have an image quality advantage over AMD's FSR2. And FSR3, while it's designed to compete with frame generation, we don't have it out yet, and AMD has mentioned that they weren't focusing on increasing the actual upscaling quality as their main focus with FSR3. So it's likely to continue to be the case that, let's say you want to do 1440p gaming with upscaling at the quality setting, the Nvidia GPU will offer better image quality when you are doing that. And you also then may want to push the upscaling a little bit more aggressively, offering additional performance benefits, and maybe you wouldn't want to push it more aggressively on the AMD GPU. So that is one of the main, in my opinion, gaming selling points to pay a little bit more on the 4070. If it's a $30 price gap, that might be worth it. Honestly, DLSS upscaling is great. And again, FSR2 is usable, but it is a noticeable difference. If we want to talk ray tracing performance, honestly, many games are designed with consoles as their main focus, and consoles have less ray tracing performance than a 7800 XT, which means that in games with lighter ray tracing implementations, or maybe we could call it more console-focused ray tracing implementations, the 7800 XT often performs similarly to the 4070, and I don't think it's a major selling point either way. However, there are some games where on PC they offer increased ray tracing workloads. For example, I tested out like Ratchet and Clank on PC offers, like you can crank things up a whole bunch past what the console offered, and then we'll see the 4070 offer a lot more performance in that situation. Also, there's games like Cyberpunk, which has a new expansion coming out, where on PC they offer even a full path tracing mode, things like that, which just really isn't something you're going to be able to handle on the 7800 XT. So I would say that the ray tracing advantage at this performance tier, the 4070 is more usable in those heavy ray tracing workloads, and in the lighter ray tracing workloads, you know, it's not a huge advantage one way or the other. So in general, I think, you know, it's a nice to have extra ray tracing performance here, but for me, the bigger selling point is the DLSS 2 upscaling, you know, image quality. Then we can talk frame generation, but AMD should be coming out with FSR3, they said, in early fall, and hey, we're headed that way. So I'd really like to get more of an idea of what that's going to look like to compete with frame generation. In general, what do I think about frame generation? And this would possibly apply to FSR3 when we see that. It's a nice to have feature, but games, for one thing, need to support it, so it's situational in that manner. It also does increase latency, which means that it's really more of a single player thing rather than a multiplayer thing, so keep that in mind as well. Again, another situational thing. And in some games, the image quality works better than others, again, making it more situational. However, in situations where you're playing a single player game and the image quality looks pretty good, it can be a nice way to take advantage of a high refresh rate display. But I think it works best when you're at a baseline frame rate that's already pretty high, 50, 60 FPS probably at least, in order for it to feel good and look good, since it's interpolating to actual game frames to insert one in between. the less difference there is between those two frames, the easier it is to have the interpolated frame look good, basically. So it's a nice to have situational thing. And then in general, Nvidia has better support in a lot of productivity applications, but your workflow on that may vary, and maybe you're not interested in that kind of workflow at all. But in general, this is a kind of a summary of the big feature set differences. And honestly, it does kind of add up. So if it's actually a $30 price difference between these GPUs, I'm going to give this a split recommendation. The 7800 XT has more raw power in a lot of rasterized situations, but averaging out over a wide number of games, it's not a massive rasterization lead. So the 4070 with the extra feature set looks pretty cool. But again, 16 gigabytes of VRAM on the 7800 XT. I should also mention the energy efficiency advantage for the 4070. So I'm going to give a split recommendation between these two. But then comes the question, what if you spend less? Okay, so we're actually going to go backwards in pricing before we look at the super expensive GPU market. Again, the 6800 XT, if pushing into that $550 on that 4070 and then even the 520, well, like I said, the 6800 XT is offering a very similar experience at $490 right now, and that's does kind of stand out if you're really pushing on the budget here. Past that point, okay, we also had the 7700 XT launch. The problem with this card is at $450, can you just stretch to that 6800 XT at $490? It's $40 more. And again, the 6800 XT and 7800 XT offer a lot more performance. They offer more VRAM for just a bit more. So that's really the problem with the 7700 XT. If you cannot spend more than $450, so you just cannot go to a 6800 XT or a 7800 XT, then the 7700 XT's main competitors are the RX 6800, which is currently, at least in the US market, I know this isn't necessarily available worldwide, coming in at 16 gigabytes of VRAM, which is more than the 7700 XT offers. And gaming performance-wise, it seems to be a swing either way unless you're VRAM limited at particular settings, which can happen. But again, at this point, 12 gigabytes is not usually causing a problem at 1440p. But it could be nice to have. And again, $430 versus $450. Again, I'm going to give this a bit of a split recommendation. The 7000 series has a few more features, like I said, with the anti-lag plus, that kind of a thing, but the 6800 coming in with 4 gigabytes extra VRAM. The 7700 XT has an AV1 encoder if you're interested in like streaming to YouTube or something like that. How about Nvidia in this price point though? The 4060 Ti, the 16 gigabyte version used to be $500. It's been pushed down to $450, but it still just doesn't make sense. At $450, it costs the same as a 7700 XT. It costs more than a 6800, and it just doesn't perform as well. So the 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti really should get pushed down to $400, at which point I think it would be more competitive. Speaking of the $400 price point, the problem there is you've got the 4060 Ti. It's kind of just hanging out. It looks like there's some models down to $380 right now, which at least makes it a little more interesting. But again, at $400, if you could stretch up to that $430, $450 to get yourself a 6800 or 7700 XT, I think you're getting a much better GPU, a lot more VRAM, and more raw performance. An 8 gigabyte card at $400 just isn't going to get my recommendation, and that's what we're sitting at with the 4060 Ti. If we get the 16 gigabyte model to basically just replace it at $400, then I think we might have something to recommend. And so really, if we're dropping below $400, I think the next card that stands out is the 6700 XT, because at $320, this is at least competitive with the 4060 Ti, but costs a lot less and has 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So as games come out with bigger texture packs, and again, VRAM usage always goes up over time, you're not really going to have to worry about fighting that anywhere near to the same amount on those graphic settings using up the VRAM and things like that. Nvidia does still have the 3060 Ti on offer, but that's $340. And at that point, at $340, the problem is that the 4060 is available at $300, or actually I'm seeing it right now at even $280, and the 4060 is also an 8 gigabyte card, performs similarly to a 3060 Ti, but with newer features and better energy efficiency. But it comes in at $280 right now versus $340 at $60 difference. I don't think the cases where the 3060 Ti is a bit faster than the 4060, which it certainly is, but I don't think it makes sense from a value perspective. So if I was going to buy one of the 8 gigabyte Nvidia GPUs, I do actually think the 4060 makes the most sense. So the 4060 as an 8 gigabyte card at $280, I hate that a lot less. It has a lot of energy efficiency. Again, it has some of that feature set. If I was going to upscale at 1080p, I'd much rather use DLSS than FSR. Things like that. So again, if I was spending a little more than $300, I'd get the 6700 XT. If I have to spend less than $300, you could consider the 4060. But there is a bit of a problem with the 4060 right now as well. I don't think AMD's 7600 is a super great competitor. Right now at about $260, it's a $20 price gap. They're both 8 gigabyte GPUs that perform very similarly. With ray tracing enabled, the 4060 is going to be ahead. However, at this performance class, a lot of times I'd be turning down or off ray tracing settings. But again, DLSS upscaling at 1080p is a lot more usable than FSR2, so that might swing me in that favor if it's a $20 price gap, which is what I'm seeing on the current market. However, the problem with the 7600 and the 4060 is that right now I can find the 6650 XT, which performs very similarly to both the 7600 and the 4060 at $235 right now. At $235, it gets harder to justify spending the $280 on the RTX 4060, unless, you really do have that budget and it's fine, right? So if I'm looking for the best value in the $200 to $300 market, I actually think this 6650 XT is standing out to me. And again, if you haven't bought Starfield yet and you're interested in it, again, the AMD GPUs are offering that Starfield bundle as well. So again, $235 here. I think that's the standout from a value perspective in this price point. Now, you can go all the way down to the 6600 from AMD, which does come down to $200. And I would say that this is the lowest I would go if I was buying a new GPU. And I still think the 6600 does have a lot of 1080p gaming performance in it. You're just definitely going to be wanting to tweak settings in the latest games and all that. Now, some of you might be asking, what about Intel GPUs? Well, the Arc A750 is the only one that makes much sense. The A770 isn't much faster despite its 16 gigabyte VRAM model, but that's all the way up at $330, and at $330, the 6700 XT from AMD just makes more sense. So the A750 is the only one worth considering from Intel at $220 though. That is extremely close. It's only $15 more to get that 6650 XT at $235. And the thing is, right now, AMD is offering more consistent performance than Intel does. And so at that $15 price gap, I would go that route. However, sometimes we have seen the A750 go on some pretty major sales. So for example, last month, I actually did recommend the A750 because it dropped in price below the 6600 non-XT from AMD. But again, if it's pretty close to 6650 XT in price, I'd rather take that. Intel drivers tend to still have more issues. For one thing, in older games, this has been getting improved a lot over time, but they're still less consistently performant and bug-free in older games. And even in the latest releases like Starfield, I'm still getting pretty terrible performance, lots of crashes and driver issues in Starfield. I remember when The Last of Us launched, I had issues with my Intel card for a long time until several patches later. So again, I just think you'll have a smoother experience on a 6650 XT and very competitive performance. So that would be my recommendation, again, in this $200 to $300 price point. So to kind of summarize, if you the cheapest new GPU I would buy would be the 6600 at $200, but I would try to stretch that to a 6650 XT. In this price range, the 4060, I don't absolutely hate it when it's dropped to $280. But again, the 6650 XT, if you can live without the Nvidia feature set, I think is offering better value, better performance per dollar. If you can go past that $300 price point, I think it's the 6700 XT with the standout 12 gigabytes of VRAM and a lot of performance. And then past this point, it was really hard to recommend anything until you got to the 6800 or the 7700 XT, which got my split recommendation. Then we said that the 6800 XT is a good alternative to the 7800 XT when the 7800 XT is out of stock at $500. At $500 or less, I think the 7800 XT has a value advantage over the 4070, but at current pricing of $520 versus $550, again, I would give a split recommendation between the 4070 and the 6800 XT / 7800 XT. I do think there's a lot to be said for the feature set there. And again, I really like that we've seen the price come down on the 4070. I would really like it to see it hit that $500 even price point, and then I would like it a lot better. Now we're moving up into the most people can't afford it GPUs, but let's see what's there, okay? So the next step up from Nvidia is the 4070 Ti. This thing still costs $800. And with the 4070 moving down to $550, that makes spending that much more on, again, still a 12 gigabyte graphics card on the 4070 Ti just feels really bad. 12 gigabytes for $800, especially when we're seeing some movement down on some other GPUs, feels really bad. But do we have any competition? We have AMD's 7900 XT, coming in at $785 right now, $790, $800, so similar pricing, a little bit less. It offers 20 gigabytes of VRAM. So I'd kind of break it down like this. I think that at 4K resolution, 12 gigabytes for $800 feels really bad. And a bit more raw performance is certainly welcome. And also, when you're looking at the DLSS versus FSR upscaling image quality, the higher resolutions are easier for AMD to look pretty good in. The lower the resolution goes, I think the better the image quality advantage goes for NVIDIA's favor. So if I was buying a 4K GPU at $800, I think the 7900 XT is going to get my recommendation. Ray tracing at 4K is going to be pretty difficult even for the 4070 Ti in the heavy ray tracing games. And again, 12 gigabytes of VRAM at 4K feels bad, especially at $800, and a bit more raw performance is also welcome. So for 4K, $800, I'd recommend the 7900 XT. If you're buying at 1440p, then the 12 gigabytes of VRAM may be less concerning, and ray tracing also becomes more usable, in which case I would give more of a split recommendation with the caveat of just saying it still feels really bad to spend $800 on a 12 gigabyte GPU. But again, at 1440p, FSR is still very usable at the quality setting, but the image quality advantage for DLSS is more noticeable. And again, the ray tracing performance of the 4070 Ti becomes a more interesting argument than it is at 4K resolution. So I'll kind of leave it at that and say split recommendation at 1440p, recommendation for 7900 XT at 4K if you're buying in the $800 price point. Now, what if you want to spend even more than $800? Well, the next GPU available is the 7900 XTX. The cheapest models I'm seeing right now are $940. It is more powerful than a 7900 XT, and it's also the only thing available at $940. So the nearest competitor it has from a performance standpoint is the 4080 from Nvidia. The 4080 is still coming in around $1,100, so it's about $100 less than its MSRP originally was. But that's still, $150, $160 price gap between the 7900 XTX and the 4080. And again, performance-wise, This is a similar story to what we're seeing all along. However, the more performance we get, the more heavy ray tracing is usable and more interesting. And that becomes, again, more of an advantage, something you might want to pay a bit more for from the Nvidia GPU. The 4080 and the 7900 XTX have very similar non-ray tracing performance, and in light ray tracing workloads, there's not a lot separating them. But the 4080 is strong enough to do things like, some upscaled, path tracing, or at least RT Ultra in Cyberpunk, that kind of a thing, and look pretty good while doing it with enable frame generation and all that. And 16 gigabytes of VRAM, I don't think is anything to be too concerned about. Obviously, the 7900 XTX does have 24 gigabytes of VRAM, but again, I feel pretty good about 16 gigabytes of VRAM right now on the 4080. I don't think getting more than that is a huge selling point right now. So basically, I'm going to say this comes down to, at $1,100, the 4080 is the best GPU, and I do like the 4080 better than the 7900 XTX. Whether it's worth the extra $150 for you for that feature set really just kind of depends on your budget. If $940 is the top end of your budget, I'll give the $940 GPU recommendation of the 7900 XTX. And if you have even more money, the 4090 is $1,600, and it's also an incredibly powerful GPU. It is noticeably better than both the 4080 and the 7900 XTX, and because of that, I do think that if you're somebody who can financially handle $1,600 easily, this is not going to be putting you in debt. This is not going to be affecting your life. You've got the extra money, and the question is just, is it worth it? In the past, with like 3080 versus 3090, it often wasn't worth it to spend the extra money because the performance difference was very small. 4080 to 4090 or 7900 XTX to 4090, there is a very noticeable performance gap that you would especially like to have at 4K gaming. So if you do have the money and can responsibly afford it, it is actually, I think, worth the extra money if you're gaming high settings at 4K. All right, that's it for the recommendations. Hopefully you guys found this video useful. I do one of these every month based on adjusted pricing, and I do try to continually retest my GPUs as time allows, as newer games come out and newer drivers and all of that. And again, you can sell your GPU on Jawa to help fund that upgrade and get $10 off with Owen 10 if you want to buy a GPU. And Jawa offers new and used stuff, and again, maybe the new market just priced you out. You might want to take a look here at what they've got used. And I hope all of you have an excellent day.